first class on newsletters. So if that's what you're here for, you're in the right place. I know it is St. Patrick's Day, so I appreciate everybody not hanging out at home, doing St. Patrick's Day things, and joining us today. If you have a question, if you could raise your hand in the chat, or if you have ideas, I'm hoping to have some time at the end to go over things, ask questions, and share any suggestions or ideas that everybody has. Okay. So I am maybe Creacia. I'm the Seneschal of Cleflands as of June, so I stepped up this summer. And before that, when everything shut down, I kind of said, okay, what can I do to help, or try to keep things going before I was an officer. And my background is in publishing and marketing, so I thought about a newsletter. I thought that was a way I could help. So I started that last March. And you might be saying, why a newsletter in this day and age? We've got social media, we've got websites, we've got emails, so why do a newsletter? Well, as I found out, it's a requirement. So some groups have to have newsletters, including kingdoms and baronies. So if you are in a group, I don't know what the requirements are in all the kingdoms, but I know at least in the middle, baronies have to have a newsletter. So since we're a barony, we had to have one anyway. So it is a requirement for some groups. It's also a great way to connect to people. Although we do have all this information out there, reaching out and putting what you want people to know directly in front of them is very powerful, as opposed to saying, check the website or check our social media, because people don't always get around to that right away. And this way, you're putting out that important information directly to them. That's not saying that we shouldn't post or use other methods. I know the internet is the thing. So we definitely should use all the other methods in front of us, but a lot of people don't necessarily go to meetings to hear announcements, or they're not on social media, or they just aren't able to see all those other sources. Maybe they don't have our website bookmarked, or you have a group that's very dispersed, or like our group is very large, but not everybody comes at any one time. So this makes it accessible and everything all in one place. So you can make sure that people are seeing everything. They know where to go to get information. They can just check the newsletter if they want any of those details on events or plans or important announcements, news, anything like that. One-stop shop for information. And it's fun, at least for me. And I mean, as I said, my background is in publishing. So I obviously like writing and reading. And I think a lot of people in the SCA do too. It's a great way to share interesting information about your group, about the SCA, about its people. And if you are in charge of the newsletter, you kind of get to look up and find fun things for you as well. So those are some of the reasons to do a newsletter for a group of any size. I think it can be important and impactful no matter what the group is. It doesn't have to be a barony or kingdom. So what is a newsletter? The requirements, there are some requirements that you have to have for a newsletter. One of them is, what group is it for? So this is our masthead for our newsletter at Cleflands. And it has Barony of the Cleflands, Middle Kingdom, which is who we are. And it's also good to have the date, so you can keep a library and keep up with the information, and the name of the newsletter, if you want to name it. Most newsletters do have a name. Internebbles was something that kind of stuck. It's these little wavy blue and white things at the top are called nebula. So on the Cleflands, we call it ourselves Nebbles. And I said, how about internebbles? And then, of course, it stuck and has not been changed. So make sure to think carefully about your newsletter name before you name it. It's also required to have a calendar or list of local events. Now they suggest that that includes online events for obvious reasons. But even going past the shutdown, when we're active again, we're probably going to see a lot more online events, and including them, we'll make sure that everybody has access and awareness of those. Also good to have news. It is a newsletter. So while it's not required to have important announcements, I always try to include important news. You can see some of this is an example of one of the issues. So important news from SCA level, kingdom level, baronial level. Even people who are very active at your local level may not get society level news. They may not see kingdom news. So again, one place to get news of everything going on, help people feel more connected to everything from local all the way up to society. Another requirement, list of contacts. It doesn't have to be all the information. An email is fine. So Claflin's is a very large group. So these are our officers, most of the officers. I had to cut a couple off, but so who your officers are, how to get a hold of them, which is usually an email address. Okay, last requirement is a disclaimer. So this is the disclaimer that we have. And you can see a chronicler to get the exact text. I've changed it a little bit for our publication, put my information in there, the date, copyright, that it's a requirement, as well as copyright or usage from sources. So for this PowerPoint, I'm using a couple photos, including one I took of myself. So the one earlier, I credit myself in there. So even if you wrote or created content yourself, you still have to make sure it's credited. And I have a couple of the images I took from the Cleveland Museum of Art, and they asked that we put this text in. So any usage text has to be included also. It's somewhere. I usually put these in the very back. After that, newsletter can be anything that you want it to be, anything that's appropriate for SCA, for your group, and for any local requirements. So some of the things we put in, how to crafting guides, write up some people's projects, trivia, of course, SCA events, write-ups or news that happened at the events, SCA history. So how did your group begin? What, who started it? What did they do? Profiles of people. It can be people in the SCA, it could be historical people, it could be people outside of the SCA. So if you have a university, maybe there's a professor there doing medieval studies. Links to interesting websites or videos, artifacts, reviews, basically anything that you can think of, anything that interests you, anything that people want to contribute that's appropriate to the time period. And we'll get into a little bit more examples later. So then who? I'm doing my who, what, where, when, why, how, a little bit out of order. But who should create the newsletter? The newsletters go under the chronicler. So it's very important to make sure your chronicler is included. It doesn't have to be the chronicler who creates or writes the newsletter, but you should always make sure that they have a copy and they have access and they're included. After that, check with the officers in your group to make sure they're on board as well. It's important to know whether or not there might be any issues with past newsletters. Maybe there were problems or things to know about, or just history about past newsletters that might have popped up. And of course, it's always good to have officers on board and enthusiastic about the project. And then gather a team. I'm very, very lucky. Lead Jalicia, who's on this call, is a journalist and she's fantastic. She's helped out a lot with ideas and enthusiasm and support. So I'm very fortunate to have her. So reach out to people who can be in your corner and kind of help out, even if they're not there every issue, even if they're not there all the time. People who can come up with ideas in your local group, if you have past newsletter editors, and really anyone who's willing to help. So it can be a big job. It's really important to have a team around you who can chip in, and that can be, they don't have to necessarily be someone who writes content. It could be someone who's really good at grammar. It can be a proofreader, or if you have a graphic designer, just came up, that idea just came up. They might be able to contribute some graphics to you, photographer, anybody who might be able to contribute, even if it's not somebody willing to do something regularly or who's able to do something regularly. It's really helpful to have people who you can go to and say, hey, I need something for this issue of the newsletter. Can you help? Or just like, I know you're really great at editing. Could you just take a look at this, make sure I don't have any errors? So having that help, don't be afraid to ask for it. It really helps share the burden and it helps make the newsletter better. Looking at your previous newsletter editors, they can be a wonderful source of history. They can give you content. They can let you know how previous issues went. And that's another great source to kind of borrow from, or previous issues. If you have any in your past group, doesn't matter how old they were, because at some point everything becomes new again. and people will not have read or seen or know about those stories. So they can be a great resource for your current issues, and you can reprint articles just as they are or do updates based on those. Okay, so how to create a newsletter. I can tell you how I do it, which is I use Adobe InDesign. I have an Adobe Creative Suite. That's for work. I use it at my job, and it's specifically made for layout. So it's a really good tool, and you can get it in a suite with Photoshop, which means you can also do photo editing, and Acrobat, which means you can edit the PDF after it's created if you need to. So that's what I would recommend, but it is not free. So it does have a monthly or yearly fee, and you can do it based on just having one program or multiple programs. So there is a structure to it. You don't have to buy the whole thing. And it's an ongoing charge. There used to be just like Word used to be, where you bought the software, you installed it, that was it. Now they are doing cloud-based subscriptions. Even though that's what I use, and it's a very robust tool, has a lot of different options. I don't even know about all the options. I've been using it for 10 years. Publisher and Word, just fine. They work great. They have a little bit more basic options, a little bit different to use, but very accessible. Everybody has them, most everybody, and they work just as well. For graphics, Canva, that's a little bit of a more modern, recent tool. If you're on the gram, if you're on Instagram, a lot of people use Canva to create their Instagram graphics, but it can be useful for any type of graphics. And it's free. That's the important thing. Speaking of graphics, so what I found really useful is that we have, again, not to keep talking about how lucky we are in Cleveland, Ohio, because we do still have a lot of snow. But the Cleveland Museum of Art is huge, and they have artifacts going back thousands of years. And they have open source, which means most of the images on their website you can use in a publication with just having that disclaimer that I showed earlier. Creative Commons, you can search for places that use Creative Commons, which means the images can be used anywhere. And some other institutions that do that are the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Paris Musée, National Gallery of Art, Yale University Art Gallery, J. Paul Getty Museum, and there are more. Those are just the ones that I thought looked the most interesting when I was researching. On a lot of museums, because we are considered not commercial and educational, you can use their images as well without paying for them. The unfortunate thing is that a lot of times there are different usage properties for different images. So even at the Cleveland Museum of Art, if there's something that's on loan, or if there's something part of a special exhibition or gallery, may not have the same open usage. So you do have to check every time that you want to use an image or graphic to see what the usage requirements are for it. You can also use paid content libraries. Again, to go back to Adobe, that's what I know. There's Adobe stock, which has basic content images. Shutterstock is another one. And then there are free image libraries, so you can clip art and things like that. Usually free images not as nice as the paid images, but in a pinch, they'll get the job done. These are great sources for general images. So if you need a picture of a castle, or we had an event that was a perfect pairing and we wanted to use a picture of pears, and we found this beautiful poached pear image on Adobe stock. So even though they're not necessarily SCA period, there are some images on there that you can use. And if you want to put a little bling in your newsletter, these are some sources to go to. That being said, images are awesome and wonderful, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. But if you can't find something that suits, don't have to have images. You don't have to use them. But definitely check out the Cleveland Museum of Art. You'll never know what they have. We had an article on Martinmas, the holiday, and I said, I wonder if they have anything on St. Martin. Lo and behold, they did. So they can really add a little bit, and it's great to have one source that you know you can use pretty regularly. Which brings me to permission. So anything that goes into the newsletter does need to have permission to be there, even if you write it yourself. So you have to give yourself permission too. There are 3 types of permission forms that currently are being used: the photographer release, model release, and creative release. Photographer release grants permission to use photos taken by the person who signs it. The model release gives permission to use photos of the person who signed it. And the creative release grants permission to use other content like articles, schematics, diagrams, things like that that aren't covered in the other 2. The difference between who is considered to be a model is kind of distilled down to, there's a lot of course, gray areas, but it's kind of distilled down to if a person is facing the camera and they could use it as a portrait, and very clear that they know that their picture's being taken, they're posing, that's considered something that we need to use a model release for. If it's not taken in a public space, they may not be aware of themselves being taken, probably need, and they're looking at the camera. I'm sorry, if they're not aware of it being taken and it is taken in a public space, you probably don't need a release for it because it is a public area and there's more people. I'll show you an example in a second. That means that you might need multiple forms for one piece of content or one article or even one photo. So for example, if you have a picture of somebody looking at the camera and smiling, you probably need permission form from them. You probably need a permission form from the photographer. And if it's part of an article, you need to make sure you have permission from the person who takes the photo or who wrote the article. And that's why I was saying that it can be a little bit complicated to use images if we're using them the correct way. You also have to pay attention to how the forms are filled out because that will determine how many times you can use an image. We've got Lord Tarmac in our group, and he has actually granted permission at the society level to use any photographs that he takes at an event. So I often look through the photos that he submitted for images of people or events so that we can use those because he has that grant of permission. There may be other photographers out there. I don't know if that's the case. I've contacted a few members of royalty and they've said that they have granted usage of their image. I don't know if that's universal, so it is always important to check. So here are my 2 photo examples to kind of show you the difference. The image on the right, she's looking at the camera, she's smiling, there's nobody else around. You probably definitely need her permission to use this photo. Image on the left, so that's cropped in. You can see that he's in a public space, it's open, there's lots of other people around, he's not looking at the camera. That you just need the photographer's permission to use. Does get a little sticky. Okay, so just to quickly show you these permission forms. Pull those up. All right, so this is the model release form. That's of the subject of the photo, and there's the name. And they do have the option to do a release for all photographs. If you can get that, awesome, because then you never have to ask again. But obviously people have the right to control usage of their image and their content. So read through here and see what they've given permission for. Photograph, very similar thing. So they can also agree to use their photos, as well as any photos they submit to the SCA. And that's something like what our Lord Tarmac has done. Granted usage. Again, great if you have a photographer, if you want to work with them and get them to fill this out, they can submit photos. You don't have to get a permission form signed from them every single time. So that's wonderful. Saves a lot of time. And this is the creative. So article, story, script, poem, song, artwork, map, and probably other things that don't fall under the above. Most people don't check off the assignment of copyright. It feels a little wonky to give someone else copyright over your own content. Some people do, but usually you can get full coverage from the options down here, and that's fine. Here's an example of how somebody filled it out for an article on a banner stand. And they said publish the work electronically and in any publication. So that's fantastic. It covers us for this article as well as any future usage. So if you print it out, you put it on the website, covered with that. All right, so how to decide what to go into the newsletter. And you may already kind of have an idea, but you know, we already went through what's required, and then past that, kind of ask yourself, how much do you want to write? I went into this knowing that I would probably have to write some content as well as doing the editing. And since I like writing, that was not a big thing. If you like writing, that may not be a big thing, but there probably will be times when you might not have anything to put in, which is also fine. You don't have to put in anything except for the requirements. But if you want to, it can be a great time to do a little bit of research, look at something fun that you want to put in yourself. Once you decide what you want to do, just know that repeated features, so having the same sections of content in the newsletter, can really cut down on time spent on each issue. So if you know every time you want to do a profile of a historical figure, you know you want to do a list of interesting websites, and you want to do one media review, and that's what you want to do in the issue. You know ahead of time that's what you're looking for. You can look for help on those particular issues. It's a lot easier to get help on something specific. And you can set aside that time and you know where to go for that. Write up some local and interesting SCA events. It's a good idea to, if you have a group that has local events, that puts on events, really good content, ask somebody who's going to the event, or maybe afterwards, if you once the event stewards are recovered from their trials, they're willing to write something up. That's awesome because of course local interest. But even beyond SCA, if you have a university close by, theater performances, Shakespeare, even if they're doing something different, or if they're doing a really excellent interpretation, anything that might be of interest in period. And of course, museums that have special exhibits or events, or regular exhibits. I mean, a lot of times people don't go and look what's in their own backyard. So starting with the basics can be perfectly fine. I mean, I live in Cleveland. It was probably 20 years before I went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So people do not explore what's in their backyard, and telling them about things that may seem obvious can be really interesting. And some more easy content that we've done, if you're willing to write yourself, is what was going on in period that day. Some interesting events, major happenings, or holidays. Like what happened in January in the world. All seem pretty basic, but not something that's generally covered in a way that everybody has seen. Other groups are also great for content. You can have them, you can kind of get permission to reprint an article, or just post links to other content from other groups. So living history groups all over do a lot of really cool things. They're doing living archaeology, they're recreating recipes, they're building houses. So go to them and see if you can get content from them. Newsletters or social media groups, also a good source. And if there are areas of particular interest to your group, look for sources. You can kind of cut down on all the things in the world and narrow it down to things that are of interest to your group. If you're anything like our group, you probably have a lot of Vikings right about now. A lot of Vikings going around. No, I'm there, but that can help narrow it down. So look for Viking era living history groups. Viking era. There's a Viking cooking on Facebook. Who knew? But go to them, and you'll know that there are people in your group that are going to be interested in that. Crafting, kind of mentioned this before, but if you see people doing crafting, that something really cool or unique, reach out to them. Ask them if they're willing to do something for that, whether it's just sharing some photos or writing an article. And it can look outside your local group. If you have somebody in your kingdom, or you just see somebody anywhere that's doing something interesting, reach out to them and see if they're willing to write an article on it. And it doesn't have to be something really fantastic, although of course we love to see things that people are doing that are amazing and fantastic, but how to start out in a craft. We've done a lot of articles at the beginning when people were first shut down to kind of say, okay, you're shut in, how about learning something new? So how to get started in a craft by people who know and who've been there, and that way you can maybe inspire a new interest in somebody. Profiles, again, kind of mentioned this, but run a profile on somebody in the SCA, someone who's done something interesting, someone in your local group, or historical people. You will never run out of historical figures to write about. You'll always find somebody to write about, so this can be a wonderful source of content. If you do a recurring section on a historical figure, you'll never run out. And just a note, but try to seek out diverse content. Don't stick to just events that are happening in Western Europe. Try to include things that are happening all across the world if you can find it. There are a lot of groups that they're not as well represented. This is a chance to kind of bring them in a little bit more in some ways, and reach out to people who represent those groups. See if they have, they probably have a lot of great things to say. And this is a good resource to share that and make sure people are becoming more aware of all those groups. Okay, so once you kind of know what you want to do, I recommend creating a template. So once you've got those regular features, lay it out so that you can reuse the same layout every time, more or less. Put in your graphics like we had our masthead. You might have your group heraldry, and then set aside approximate spacing for the content. So you got your news, your profile, your reviews, block that out, and then you can use it every time. At the end, make sure to edit and spell check. Even if you think you've already done it, do it again. I can't tell you how many times I'm like, I need to spell check. I already did that. And then I look at the final and I say, oh yes, I do. So final spell check, always good. I also try to send out advanced copies to the officers, including our wonderful chronicler, and anybody who has contributed. So if they've written an article for you, if they were the subject of an interview, I try to show it to them so they know if I had to make any edits, or just so they can get a chance to see it in print. Sometimes people have last minute corrections or changes. And then export the final file to a PDF. That's usually the most universal way to share a document. You can activate links so that people can click on links and go directly to your content. So if you have videos or articles or other resources, you can activate them and people can click on it right away if they want to see something cool that you're featuring. Keep a library. This may seem obvious, but I know people who have saved over their previous versions. That might have been me at one point, and gone back and said, what did oh man, I can just pull this from that past issue. It's like, oh, I saved over it. Thinking that I would just needed to keep the template going. So do save an issue, not just of the final version, but also of the file, because you never know when you might want to go back and pull something from it. All right, so I'm going to show you InDesign. I don't know how people may have already been using it, but this is what I use. This is InDesign, and I kind of pulled a standard issue. You can see all the nuts and bolts back here, but it's pretty easy to use. You can just drag and drop in a lot of ways. Our image, want to resize your text. Very easy to use. And there's a lot of classes on YouTube if you ever want to learn. I trained myself on this and I've been learning ever since. So there's a lot of things that you can do with it. This is pretty basic. I'm not a graphic designer. If you are one or know one, they could probably do something much better than what I've done. But it definitely allows for a lot of mobility. You can change colors really easily. Want a different color scheme. I clicked on everything that's blue. If you change that to green, get your photos. And this is the back end view. So it shows you what's going on back there. You can shrink photos, move things around. So this is kind of, you see I've got section for news, article, the recurring section, recurring section, recurring section, recurring section. This is our standard required information on the back, trivia, recurring section, and recurring section featuring Claricia. So you can kind of see how I've done that. If you do something similar or you're interested in doing this, really saves a lot of time, because then I know I've got to find my object of the week, put it in here, find classes, put it in here. Saves a lot of time. A lot of the time spent that I spend is when we have larger issues that have a lot of photos. So resizing and moving photos around takes a lot of time. Okay, oh, stop too soon. So to share some examples of what that looks like when it's done. So this is the newsletter we just looked at. It looks basically the same, but a little bit more cleaned up. So again, this is really basic, and I apologize to anyone who's a graphic designer who's more graphic sensitivities than I do, because it is very plain. So you can put as much into it or as little as you want. You don't have to have any or all of this except for the required content. This is kind of how it ends up turning out. Very simple. Doesn't have to be a lot. Gets all of the required information out there, and it's easy to read. Here is a special issue that we put out recently. Claflin's has an event that we call regular event that we usually do every January or February. It was the last event most of us attended before the shutdown last year, and this year it has been delayed until the fall. So we did a special issue, included history of the event, all the past themes, and some cool photos I got from people. I put a call out for images from past events, got some old site tokens and pictures, some fun ones in there, as well as some great stories. So doing a special themed issue is also an option. People usually like to share their stories. They have good memories of a lot of our events. The SCA does take a little bit more time. I would say a regular issue usually takes me probably about 4 to 6 hours, starting from start point all the way to posting at the end. And this one is more like 10-ish hours. And a lot of that is just figuring out how to organize photos. So again, graphic person may be better at that than I am, but these are usually some of the more popular issues because everybody does like photos. Okay, so when to put out a newsletter, again, it's required. Baronial newsletters need to be put out every quarter. But other than that, unless you have a requirement, you can put it out as often as you like. I find it really helps to have a regular schedule, so I know, okay, this is when the date is going out. I set aside time going up to it, and make sure I have enough time to put everything together and get it out. Right now I started doing every week. There's a lot of news at first, a lot of people doing fun videos that we wanted to share, and that slowed down over the summer. Now we do every other week, and what I do is after work, I work at home right now. I set aside about half an hour, stay at my desk a little longer, and do about half an hour, 45 minutes of work a couple days a week, and that usually works pretty well. Once I go back to the office, if you're back in the office, you probably unfortunately don't have that, but it's nice to be able to set aside a little bit of time instead of doing it all at the last minute. You may have a different method if you like doing everything all at once, by all means, but just I find it helps to know when that is going out, so I know for my work method what works best. And consider posting more frequently around important events. So if you are running, your group is running an event, or there's a big event that everybody likes to go to, leading up to that and following it, it's nice to post a little bit more often. So if you do every quarter, maybe do a little more often, so that any calls for assistance, staff needs, important announcements around those are heard and put in front of people. And then of course, the follow-up, people who couldn't make it or just want to relive the memories, or when you're at an event, you don't get to see everything that goes on, putting out something as a summary or follow-up. And then where? So where should the newsletter go? To the chronicler. Make sure the chronicler gets a copy. But after that, you have to have print copies if anybody needs it. Right now, of course, we're not in person. I haven't had anybody request a print copy. I would probably just print it out myself if anybody did at this time. And then once we are back in person, in the past, I know I talked to some of the previous editors and they would make copies and then get reimbursed from the barony for them. So that would be something that you'd have to work out, those print costs, if you want to have them, or they're not required. You can also wait until somebody asks and handle it that way. But it is nice to have those print copies every time. Previous editor, when she put it out, they were always taken. Again, it's a case of putting something right in front of somebody, as opposed to having them do a couple extra steps for it. People tend to engage more when it's right in front of them. And then right now it's all digital. So I post a copy to our website to make sure there's a library resource that everybody can access. And then I send an email to attach a physical copy of the PDF, or I shouldn't say physical, to attach a separate copy of the PDF, and then also post a link on social media to the website. So doing it in a couple different ways, again, helps with access. So people who may get our group's email can see it that way. People who are on social media see it that way. And if they have direct copy of the PDF, they can print it out if they want to, or they can view it on their phone or whenever they want to. So I try to do it in multiple ways. The website itself doesn't count as a newsletter. This is a question that we asked. So it does kind of have to be a separate thing than having a page on your website that has the news and other information. So determining how you want to do that distribution is up to you and how your group operates. We have an email list. You may not have one. You may want to start one. That way we get a lot more people who maybe haven't come to a meeting in a while or don't, and hopefully engages them. Okay, so these are my additional tips. Again, some of these you probably know or have thought of, but 500 words for an article. That was Lady Jalicia's idea, and it has done very well. It's not too long. People don't get scared if you ask them for a 500 word article, and it fills up space pretty well. So if people submit, I tell people, if you want it, however long or short you want to be, I will find room for it, because I'd rather have too much content than too little. So 500 words is great. Don't get discouraged. It can be a lot of work, and it may feel like it's just going out into the world and nobody's looking at it, nobody's reading it, nobody cares. They do. I have to tell myself that sometimes, but if I reach out to somebody and say, hey, I don't know if you've seen this newsletter I've been putting out, and every time they've been like, oh yeah, I've been reading that. I think it's really great. Thanks for doing it. So don't be discouraged if you are doing a newsletter, or if you start doing it and you don't hear anything back. If people don't like or reply to your post on social about it, more people are reading it than you think. Work with what you have. If you're shy a little bit, or even if you're not, it can be hard to ask people to submit content. Don't be afraid to ask. The worst they can do is say no or ignore it. I usually ask the person twice, and then after that, kind of let it go, because I figure either they've seen it and they don't want to, or they have other things going on, whatever it is. I don't want to constantly bother them. But depending on your relationship with the person, maybe you would ask more than that, but that's kind of been my go-to. Don't force it. If you don't have a lot of content, that's okay. I mean, I think I've yet to have somebody, when I have a short issue or when I don't put out an issue, to say anything about it. Do whatever you have at that time. If you only have enough time to put down some trivia or to do a profile of an interesting historical person, and that's it, you don't have any articles, you don't have any images, that's fine. People are still learning something, they're still getting some trivia. We all love trivia. So if nothing else, you've done that. And even if not, if you're just getting the information out there, whatever you can do. That's another reason to kind of do the newsletter a little bit more regularly than required, because if you skip an issue, you've already done the requirement and you don't have to worry about it. I already talked about setting aside time ahead of time and sending out copies. I put this in here twice because it's always good to have a second set of eyes. And again, that person doesn't have to be in your group. It doesn't have to be an officer. It can be your spouse. It can be your friend. It can be your son or daughter. It can be anybody. Because you've looked at this probably so much that you do not see that you deleted an entire paragraph and now it doesn't make sense. A second set of eyes will help catch that kind of thing. And then send out the copies in the final check, which I also mentioned a little bit earlier. Okay, so that was it, kind of the basics of how to start a newsletter and how to hopefully keep it going once you're running with it, which is the most important thing, is to do it as long as you're having fun. As long as it's rewarding for you, keep doing it, because there are people who are getting something out of it, even if they don't always say it. Anybody have any questions, comments, ideas, suggestions? All right.
Wait, I do.
Okay.
Did you see me? Okay. Hi, I'm Jalicia, and I'm Claricia's partner in crime on this. Actually, it's all her, and she's been really brilliant about this. I am a journalist, but I could not have more deadlines and things in my life, as I explained to Claricia. Plus, she has the layout knowledge that I don't have. I could never make it look as good as she does. So it's been really great to have her doing this, and she's been so great in keeping it going through the pandemic, which has been really challenging. And do you mind if I just say a couple things?
Oh, no, go ahead. They've all been nice so far, so. Okay.
All right. Well, I'll just mention some things that she and I have talked about as we've gone along, or as she's gone along. And one of the things I really like about the way she does it is she sends it out for us to look at, but she gives us time. You know, I think if you're going to do that, you have to bake it in your schedule that you're going to have to give people 2 or 3 days to respond. Don't send it out and then say, well, if I don't hear from you by midnight, I'm sending it out, you know. So that's something to think about. And one of the pieces of advice I always give people, I used to work with teenagers who did high school newspapers, and they would say, well, you know, we haven't put out a newspaper in months because nobody turned their stuff in on time. And my biggest piece of advice is don't let that happen. Just like Clarissa said, whatever you have, just do it. As I say, the train leaves the station, you know, and that has 2 things. Once people see that you're serious and it's going to come out anyway, if they want their stuff in, they'll get on the ball and get it to you because they'll see that you're serious. And then also, if it's coming out regularly, you have that top of mind awareness. People are aware of it. And that's also will give them some impetus to get you their stuff. But don't let people hold you hostage. And then your newsletter never comes out and people don't see it. And it's like, well, where is it? You know, why should I write for this thing that no one ever sees? You know, so that's important. And the other thing, like I said, I'm a journalist and I work with deadlines. And I think personally it's important to give people deadlines. Not in a kind of, you know, I'm going to come and, you know, shake my finger at you kind of way, but I think it just sets up an expectation. So if you can say to people, well, can you get this to me next week? I need it by X date. Again, in a nice, gentle way, but I think it gives people, you know, do you need it? Do I have a month or do I have a week? You know, it gives people some idea of what you're looking at. And the main thing is to not get discouraged. And And Clarissa, actually during this, I got a story idea for us. I'll talk to you about later. But maybe you could, if no one else has any questions, maybe you could, or after you answer their questions, you could talk about the special challenges of doing this during the pandemic, because I think you did start it when we were still running, didn't you? Yeah. And then everything shut down and we're like, well, what are we going to write about? You know, because usually you would have events and classes and meetings and all these things going on. And we're just looking at each other going, what do we do now? But she's been a real genius at coming up with stuff. We just had to come up with stuff and really pull in things that aren't specifically SCA, but are like SCA adjacent. Like I write this little thing now where I go to a bunch of websites and I find the archaeology news. You know, they found bones under a bridge in Scotland or something, and I just make little blips of each thing. And you know, it's interesting. I think it's interesting, you know, because they're always coming up with new stuff about our hobby, even though it's things from centuries ago. So we've had to think about that. We've done book reviews. I think I did something on podcasts one time. All kinds of things like that. So it has been a challenge. So anyway, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions, comments, suggestions, ideas?
I have a question regarding something that Jolicia said, where she took something that she found on the internet and put it in the newsletter. What kind of permission do you need to do that?
Okay, yeah, I should have clarified. I don't think you need permission, at least I'm not getting permission, but what I am doing is rewriting it. That's the key. You do not have permission to just take it whole hog and go blip in your newsletter. What I do is I take, if there's an article about a archaeological site or a dig or something, usually most of the information is in those first 3 paragraphs. And so I'll copy that over to my document, but then I rewrite it, you know, so it's not the same. And I give credit, you know, if it mentions this dig was by a certain university or, you know, whatever, and then I link to the original. So I'm not claiming it as mine.
Okay.
I'm saying, according to archaeology.net or whatever it is, you know, the University of London uncovered blah, 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 blah. And here's the
a specific SCA, something that SCA has posted, that there's a challenge, an archery challenge.
I don't think you have a problem with that. I mean, I would probably at least somewhat rewrite it so you're not plagiarizing. But I mean, Claricia knows more about this than I do, but I think that's content that we can use. But I think you have to attribute it, you know, you have to say, you know, according to the, you know, SCA.org, but also linking to the original covers your butt for a lot of stuff, because that's kind of the key, that this is coming from someplace else. But if you're just announcing an event or something like that. Now, what I would not do is if there's an article, you know, like in Tournaments Unlimited, or, you know what I mean, an article on archery, or here's how to dye wool or something that's got a byline, you know, who wrote it. Do not just take that. Again, you could rewrite it and say, you know, Lady Claricia wrote this article about wool dyeing, and here are some highlights from it, and here's the link to the original article. I think you could do that. Or you could ask Lady Claricia to rewrite it, you know, for you or something like that. I don't know, Claricia, what do you think? How would you answer that?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on. You can also ask for permission to reprint it. So
yeah.
Hey, something that I would suggest you do, like especially if it's an official SCA something, look at the bottom and see if they've given you permission for fair use or permission to use it in things. A lot of times that is implied in that, and for anything that's like an official thing, they want that disseminated, so you can certainly use that. I would just look at the difference between plagiarizing the article and what I would do, what I call passing it along. You can rewrite your own blurb and say, I'm directing you to here, and I haven't done anything wrong, and that's all my original information, but it gets the purpose of getting me to get you to see that article, because I don't want to rewrite their whole article. I just want to get you there.
Yeah,
Does
exactly.
that make sense?
Thank you.
And I think there's some things too that, like trivia, if you're not just copying text, like, Henry VIII had 6 wives, you don't have to attribute something like that because it's
Right.
general knowledge or general information.
Right.
I would be interested in seeing what you did during the pandemic, because I know it has to be more trying. I mean, you have to do everything digitally, but also there's less content in certain areas. Like there was no events, so it's very hard to do that. Did you guys go to ethereal court and do court awards for folks that are in, like within your guys' instance, the barony of the Cleflins or Bryn Doken or Middle Marches, whichever the case may be, for that individual chronicler?
Yeah, so we have had several baronial courts, or a couple, and then we've had some royal courts. So you can do a court report, and some of the courts they highlighted. I can't remember who it was who built that Viking house. I know, always with the Vikings, but that was a project that I wanted to feature. So people bringing things up in court or on social media. There was a 12th night challenge. 12th night, I think it was 12th night challenge, that people submitted to virtually. We highlighted that, and then we also highlighted events past. So right now, I showed you the regular event issue. We also did an issue for Penzic, and we did an issue for another big camping event that we have. So even though we didn't have the actual physical events, we could still write about them as events past. And it was, for me, even though I've been in the group for several years, I don't know a lot of the history behind these events, or some of the really cool things that happened. Like I learned that a hot air balloon landed at one of our events and somebody had a picture, and that was fantastic. So it's a great chance to kind of get people engaged and interested in those things that they can't do in person, but they can think about the cool things that happen that might happen again. So we did a bunch of content around that. And then, being perfectly honest, there are some issues where it was the last minute and something didn't come in. And I said, okay, what holidays happen in September in period? And did some Google searches around that. And if you just write like a couple lines about each holiday, before you know it, you've got 500 words. So then that was also a chance to bring in other cultures. So I tried to make sure that I got as many different cultures as I could in there. And I'm hoping that people get a little bit more exposure to those other things. So Lady Jalicia did an article on daffodils at the beginning, because we were that was when we were like, what do we write about? And
yeah, I remember that. We were really desperate, and I love daffodils, and I found out that they're periods. So yeah, I found out a lot of stuff about daffodils. Yeah. And that's where I went to several different websites and kind of put the information together, and again was linking and rewriting the information and kind of synthesizing it. And another thing I'd like to say is I think we would have a lot more people writing. I think it would be easier for Claricia to get the information from people if we were in person. I mean, don't you think, if we could,
yeah, because there is that,
and buttonhole them and all that, the distance has made it harder, And
that's another thing. I think if it were in person, I would know whether or not they're getting my email. I wouldn't have to say, okay, well, I've bothered them twice, probably don't want to do it, as opposed to being able to say, hey, I just wanted you to know I was really interested in this project you did. Would you be willing to do it? And it makes it harder for them to say no also a little bit. Or at least it makes it harder for them not to give you an answer.
Well, in person, I would think that you could, I could read the person and see if they're just a little reluctant, but they really want to do it. And you can, so then you could encourage them to help them help you. Or if they really, I just want no part of it, and they're kind of dead set in that. And it's, you don't beat a dead horse, just leave it alone.
Yeah, or if they're just
Um,
saying nice to be, saying yes to be nice and make you go away.
Yeah, and that
Something
would
I
be
was
helpful. Like, I've had
thinking,
some, oh, no, please.
there's a couple or three resources that I thought of that you can use if you, especially if you need last minute stuff. Like in the Middle Kingdom, we have youth activities, we have paid school, there's deans. So there's like some of these have, if you'll go get them, they have activities to keep your kids occupied, things like that, that they have pre-done stuff for you to disseminate that you can, you know, if you've got kids within the area, I think Cleflands has a large enough area that they do, that they're going to have folks, and that would pertain to you, can do that. Penzic or Gulf Wars or something like that, you could do that like that. Like I know for Penzic, if you go to the penzicward.org thing, there's going to be a list of staff people. And I don't care, you can hit me up, go to martial activities. What changes in martial activities this year? Or what's going to be different for the youth activities program? What things should people that are attending, you know, that would be more during a normal year, but use those resources, ask them what they're changing, ask what people can expect. Get an idea. Well, what would we do? Cleflands is big enough that you're going to have maybe people who've never been to Penzic before. You could do a whole series of articles on what should I expect? How can I camp? What should I take to Penzic? What should I expect when I get there? Get somebody, ask, you know, people on Penzic staff would be happy to help you. And there is a media part of our staff that's for that.
Yeah.
So use it.
Yeah. You know what I'd love to see is an article that would be like 5 little known things you should enjoy at Penzic. Like, you know, everyone knows about the fighting and the shopping, but have people suggest like little things or, you know, out of the way things that you might miss. That would be a fun article.
It would. And I can think of stuff like if you go back over kind of towards where the two chucks are, there's a set of woods there and there's all these little kind of trail roads and stuff like that. There's a whole set of fairy shrines, if that's what you want to call them, but people have made little rock formations and carved all kinds of things, which are well worth seeing. They're art in their own right, but probably out of 10,000 people that go to Penzic, less than a couple hundred even know they're there.
Okay, I want to write that story. I want to write that for the Penzic Independent. That's cool.
All right,
Right, I'll help you.
First.
Give me a yell, I'll help you.
No, you know what? I just stole
No,
your
I'm saying
story.
I'll help you. I'll help you with information and I'll put you in contact with other people to get your stuff and you write it.
No, you should write it. That was your idea. I just stole it. You should write it. We'll fight about it later, but it's a great idea.
I was like,
okay.
Someone's gonna write it. That sounds like a great idea. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we have somebody in our group who is the previous mayor of Penzic. And I asked her to write like a behind the scenes Penzic, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I will." And then she, of course, kind of felt that was one of the ones where I asked her a couple times, and she said yes, and then stopped replying. So I was like, I don't know if I should keep that. So being in person would help a lot with that, and that would have been a really cool article if we had gotten it. But that's a good point about the
Clarissa, do you want to tell people about the Sutton Who author that we had? I'm blanking on his name. You know what I mean?
Calamar?
Yeah, tell him about
Duke
that.
Calamar. I was gonna say he's our Baron. He's my Baron. I mean, he is.
Yeah.
No, you should go seek him out because he'll talk for forever on this stuff in a good way. I mean, like I could talk with him for, you know, a whole day.
And I think that's really key, is finding people who are passionate about something, because usually they'll want to say something. And 500 words for somebody who knows a lot about the subject is not very much. So that's something I'd like to get better at, is knowing those people and having a resource, not necessarily like a directory, but just like knowing more of those people who could talk forever. I love hearing people talk about what they're interested in, which is probably why I thought it was a great idea to do a newsletter. So if you know anybody like that.
Well, like in your guys' area, Viscountess is Girder, Sir Kjartan. If you want to know stuff about Viking stuff, ask is Girder or Kjartan, either one. And they both do activities like we're part of a group that does Viking hiking, where you try to get historic accoutrement and do a hike during that, cooking pots and do everything and cook that way. and they could give you all kinds of stuff and they'll talk to you.
Okay. I'm a
And
little
they're
bit shy about reaching
local.
out to
They're like
people,
in
so-
Chesterland.
Wait,
You know, they're
where?
like in Chesterland. So
No way.
they're in Chesterland, which is off the, yeah.
That's where I live.
I said they're local to you.
Okay. Well, I have no excuse.
See, and like, well, I mean, okay, look, just us, you know, talking and chit-chatting, you'll find people, the more that you talk, I guess it's the same basic thing as LinkedIn. The more you talk to people, you'll find people that you know or are one step removed, an acquaintance or whatever, and you get all kinds of information because they'll know somebody that you don't, and they may even be local to you. Because it's like, okay, I used to hang out a lot in Cleveland, but that's been 20 years ago.
Oh.
You know, and stuff changes, but you still have friends and stuff like there, and people do their own thing, and we separate a little bit, but networking, you can find a lot of stuff out.
Yeah, I gotta be less shy, I think. Reach out to people. Well, awesome.
Oh, so you mean be like me and just like talk to everybody?
Yeah. I mean, this is a class hopefully for everybody, but I feel like I've gotten a lot out of it, so thank you.
No, thank you. I was good class, very good class. I appreciate you teaching. I checked, we didn't have any more questions from Facebook. I didn't see anything there. So if anyone's got any questions here.
Okay, sounds good. Good talk. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for teaching. It's very, very, very much appreciated.